Joining us today for our Q&A with Luke Mill and Renee Patrick on how to packraft. I'm Liz Thomas, an editor and co-founder at Treeline Review. And along with Naomi Huditz, who is also on this call. For those of you who are new to Treeline Review, our goal is to provide welcoming and inclusive gear reviews so you can buy right the first time, saving you time and money, which is better for you and better for the planet. And a few housekeeping rules: this will be recorded and is being live streamed. So to make this easier for folks on other platforms, we will be turning off video and muting and spotlighting Luke and Renee so that you'll be able to see and focus on their conversation. If you have questions during the talk, please put it into the chat, and we will have time, about 15 minutes for Q&A afterwards. So without further ado, Renee Shira Patrick has been hiking long distance trails for almost 20 years, packrafting for almost 10. She's a Triple Crown hiker with well over 11,000 trail miles under her belt and has enjoyed discovering the landscape from the bow of her packraft around the Pacific Northwest. When she isn't busy at work establishing the 750-mile Oregon Desert Trail, she can be found rafting, backcountry skiing, or just forest bathing. And she can be found on Instagram at We Are Hiker Trash. Luke Mill grew up in the village on the, I apologize, I might get this wrong, the Kuskokwim River in Alaska. Growing up off the road system, you have to fly to the village, nurtured a strong appreciation for nature and Alaska's wild places. After completing graduate degrees at UCSB and MIT, Luke returned to Alaska to work in environmental sciences and to explore the mountains as often as possible. Luke has visited over 10,000 miles of Alaska by foot, ski, ice skate, and packraft. After losing a friend in a packrafting incident in 2014, Luke reevaluated his relationship with recreation risk. This process ultimately resulted in writing the Packraft Handbook, a comprehensive instructional resource for people that want to incorporate portable boats in their adventures. Without further ado, I will let the two of them take it away. Thank you so much, Renee and Luke.
Thanks, Liz. Well, we have a lot of questions that both Treeline Review readers have submitted, questions that I've been asked over the years packrafting, but more than just questions, I want to have a conversation. Luke has a huge amount of experience packrafting. As Liz said, I've been getting into it almost 10 years now, but I thought a good place for us to start is at the beginning. How we got into packrafting. And actually, Luke plays a role in my story. So I started backpacking in 2002 on the Appalachian Trail. Loved it, fell in love with the simplicity of life, just walking everything I needed on my back. And then when I met my partner, Kirk, about 12 years ago now, he was a whitewater paddler. So I say he is to rivers as I am to trails. So as I was hiking 2,000 miles, he was hucking off waterfalls that were maybe not 2,000 miles, but he was doing extreme whitewater paddling. And I brought to the equation the light weight backpacking, and he explained like his desire or what he had been doing, packing hardshell kayaks into remote wilderness rivers to experience the landscape. So then when we became aware of pack rafts, and it really, I think Luke can talk to this, but we became aware of them about 10 years ago. They took off in Alaska. And the only resources I really found was your blog, thanks to look at Forrest McCarthy and Roman Dials, the three like really content producers out there exploring the world in a pack raft. So we purchased pack rafts, and because I couldn't find much, what I did learn from your blog, Luke, is curiosity is a great teacher and a great sort of director as to where to go and how to go, is look at a map and use curiosity as your guide. So thank you for writing about and filming some of your adventures, because it helped me get out the door and just say, okay, well, I don't know who's done packrafting in Oregon, but let's just go do it.
Oh, that's
and what
awesome.
about you? How did you get into it?
Yeah, I mean, what like you, I came into it as a backpacker, and I had, even though I grew up on a river, it's pronounced Kuskokwim. It's not an easy one though. Even though I grew up on a river, I hadn't done any river sport. I didn't think of it as a recreational outlet. And so you and I share that common background. But what was different is that you had a partner that knew about water, and I didn't have that initially. So with my peers, and it was some high school friends, some other friends in Anchorage that were getting pack rafts, and they were really getting them as like hiking accessories. It was kind of like the tennis shoe that would bring you down the river. You could almost think of it that way, without a lot of foresight into what that really meant in terms of the river, because it's like when you're on water, you don't have a lot of control over, you know, where the water's flowing. So I was lacking that in my learning curve, and then got really lucky to fall in with Roman Dial, and he had kind of organized a group of pack rafters that were really interested in rapids and whitewater. And there were some kayakers that saw what was going on and were like, hey guys, how about we go with you and just kind of look out for you a little bit and set up some safety. And so those guys introduced all of these safety norms that I assume you got from Patrick, that I didn't really have until those guys stepped in. So that was all part of my evolution from a backpacker to somebody that was like, wow, whitewater is super fun. And now I'm at the point where I probably prefer to go whitewater boating than to go backpacking. Like I've had that full swing over the last 15 years.
Yeah, and I almost equate reading a river or learning a river as another language, much like if you're walking without a trail. I love routes or just cross-country hiking, is you read the terrain and know where the path of least resistance is. And a river is the same. It's more than just an accessory, and I think that's what your book gets at. And you have this culture of safety that you're talking about, but it's not an accessory. It's a very high risk sport with severe consequences. And I think, yeah, I was lucky in that I had, Kirk had been a teacher and a guide there to teach me. But yeah, what would you say to people who want to get started and think, oh, I'm just gonna throw this boat in my backpack? Like, do you have something you come out and say, rather than, okay, here's a 500-page book, here's where you can get started? Where do you suggest people start?
I suggest, and I suggest it in the book too, to start at a pond. And the book is broken up into 4 parts, and the first part is like foundations, or basically getting started. And it's basically what we would do, you know, me and not you, but somebody as a new pack rafter, or you. I mean, it's really good to practice this each season, but we'd get together, we'd go to the pond or some other like controlled setting, and we'd inflate our boats and kind of look at the rigging and make sure there aren't any loose straps or other things that could potentially trap us in the boats. That's been the cause of a few fatalities, pack raft fatalities. So we talk about that outfitting and kind of like, how important is it to wear a life vest? Well, it's really important. You should wear a life vest. And we talk through some of the equipment, and then we get in the water, and kind of the whole strategy in the book is to anticipate what goes wrong and then practice how to respond when it does. Just kind of assume it will at some point. Things will go wrong. Like that's part of the game of playing outside. And so what we're most worried about in the water is that you're going to fall out of your boat. And that can happen on a lake, like if the wind picks up, if there's waves. So it doesn't have to be whitewater pack rafting that we're talking about. It doesn't have to be a high risk environment. You could still fall out of your boat. So we practice how to get back in the boat. And those are really, that's where I'd start. It's like, look at your gear, understand the limitations of your gear, and make sure that it's outfitted for safety. And then practice the things that you think might go wrong. And it helps to have somebody there that can kind of inform you about the things that might go wrong. Right? If you're a total newbie, you're like, how do I identify the things I don't already know? If I don't know anything. And hopefully resources like the book can help fill in some of those gaps.
Yeah, I know when I started, I was new to moving water, and I would have a death grip on my paddle at any time. And it's like my hands hurt so bad because I was gripping and I was petrified to fall out. And I still don't like falling out, but it was really like you have to get comfortable falling out because it will happen. The first time I fell, I flipped over. I couldn't get the Velcro on my skirt. So luckily I do a lot of yoga. And so my head was above water, my boat still underground. It's like, I needed that. I should have done that before in the lake, before I got in a river. And yeah, I'm still resistant to swimming, but that is, once you swim and you know what to do, yeah, that's really, really useful to practice the worst case scenario, really.
And I think
but
you
it seems
said,
like we can really break down. Sorry, go ahead.
well, I liked how you first brought up curiosity, and I think that just captures it. It's like, it's a combination of caring about your own well-being and then curiosity about like, well, what would happen if I fell out of my boat? And one of the early seasons for me, I remember a group of friends was meeting like every Tuesday to run a little in-town run. And at the end of that run, I would always flip out of my boat just to practice it. And during that summer, I got like more and more comfortable with it. Toward the end, I'd be like, hey, let's flip our boats and switch paddles, you know, or I'd like throw my paddle as far as I could and then jump out of my boat. Like, but it was just a game. It was just, I knew the river was safe. I knew I had capable partners that could help me out. And so I just use that as an excuse to be curious and to play with what can go wrong.
That's great. Yeah, make it part of your routine or something a little bit to do every time and to practice. I like that. I need to be better at that myself. So it seems like we can really break down, this is a big conversation, how to get started, like gear is a whole category, skills is a category, safety is a category, and trip planning. It's almost like there's 4 buckets. Would you agree, or would you break that down any differently?
Yeah, I have thought a lot about how to split stuff into buckets. My buckets that I ended up with in the book are a little bit different, but that's because I had the space to really expand on each of those. Just for the sake of conversation, my buckets were that foundations, getting started stuff that we talked about. And then the next part is about how rivers and open water work. Like, what are the hazards? How do you paddle? River features? How do you do open water crossings? And then the next part is everything that can go wrong. And so that it covers rescue techniques that you would get in a swiftwater rescue training course. It also covers medical emergencies and equipment failure, how to repair equipment. And then the last part is sort of the backpacking part, carrying cargo, planning a trip, gear to bring. So those were the buckets I ended up with.
So where would you like to start tonight? I know this is a gear review website, so we probably should talk about gear to some degree.
Let's do it.
All right, so let's go first. Boat, like what are the options? I know when I first started looking, I paddle an Alpaca pack raft. There weren't many other folks making pack rafts. Can you speak to the variety and the types of crafts that are out there right now?
Yeah, so they're right, when I got into it, Alpaca Raft was the only company making boats that were were intended for backpacking and downriver travel. That's what's unique. Like there already were sort of some like Walmart quality and higher quality boats, but that were too heavy to consider backpacking or weren't appropriate for downriver travel. So that's really what changed early 2000s with Alpaca Raft. And then since then, as the market has expanded, I think now there are at least 32 pack raft manufacturers. So at this point, it's like I can't keep track of all the options, which is great because those different manufacturers bring in new insights. And I guess it's kind of a mixed blessing because you and our first boats, it was like the boat. It's the only one. You had to just decide which size you were in. And now you can get a boat that is better for whitewater, but maybe a little heavier, or better for open water crossings, or better, or the 2 pound, 1 kilogram pack raft that's great for backpacking, but not good for rivers. So now you kind of have to really identify what you're after. And I've put some thought into this as far as like, because I feel this question a lot, what boat should I get? And my answer, at least in the book, and what I'm holding to right now is the right pack raft for you is the one you can borrow, the one you can afford or rent. And what matters is that you do that outfitting check that we talked about. We could talk about that more if folks want more details on that, like making sure there's nothing in there that might trap you. And then equally important is to choose a destination that's appropriate for that boat and appropriate for your skill level. So it's totally acceptable for somebody to get a $100 Walmart boat, so long as they're just going to stay close to the shore in this little pond or something, right? And not try to take that on a 2-week expedition or down a river. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And it fits the Treeline, I think, philosophy, like that inclusivity. Like it's more important to start somewhere and just recognize how to do it safely than to feel like you need to make the $2,000 investment, because and this stuff adds up, and you don't want to skimp on the safety gear.
Right. And I know there are some pack raft rental companies out there as well. So I love that idea. And a lot of us through hikers are just dirt bags and we don't want to spend money. So borrow a boat, rent a boat before you put that investment. And I know, $1,200 when I bought mine was a lot, but I've probably per use, it's down to like pennies because I've used it so much. It's also probably how are you going to use it? How often, for what kind of trips? And it's really, that's how you might be able to justify a more, expensive gear purchase. Like, is your partner, is your family, is your dog? I know there's all sorts of qualifications that you want. What is your trip going to be? I like that. It depends on what your goals are and what your budget is. So it doesn't stop there. The next big item, you can't pack raft without a paddle. I know I've been using a 4-piece breakdown Warner paddle because it breaks down into 4 pieces and I can put it in my pack and hike with it easier. It's a whitewater blade. So I really haven't used anything else, but do you have a preference or a particular paddle you like to use?
No, I think what most people end up doing is sort of both with the boat and with the paddle, if they stay in the sport for a while, is you start with something that's entry level and then you fall in love with the sport and at some point decide to upgrade and sell your entry level, or you keep it as a spare, get something more expensive. And for paddles, that's mostly determined by the material of the paddle. And so that most expensive end of the spectrum is carbon fiber, and expert paddlers are going to justify that cost for the lightweight and the rigidity of the paddle. The tier below that is fiberglass. Those are awesome. They're light, they're stiff, and they're more affordable. And the level below that would be some sort of plastic or hybrid paddle. And those are the most affordable. They're a great place to start. And you might feel the paddle flex a little bit when you use it in the water. And that probably won't bother you for your first season, but maybe on your second season, you're like, gosh, I wish that felt a little stiffer, something like that. I think a common mistake with Packraft paddles is that I think people generally choose a paddle that's too long, and the length of the paddle is relevant to whether you're going to be mostly on open water or mostly on rivers. You want a shorter paddle on rivers. And the idea is, see if I can do this as a little graphic. Here's my paddle. Like on rivers, you're making deep strokes in the water, like high angle strokes. You're trying to catch a big chunk of the blade, like reach deeper water. And on open water, you're using lower angle strokes like this. And so that's where a longer paddle is. It's easier on your body to spend a whole day using that long paddle. So for Packrafters who are usually kind of in between those two, doing some rivers and some open water, I think the sweet spot is a paddle that's about 197 or 200 centimeters in length. That's for male identifying, female identifying. It's kind of all body types.
Something I didn't realize I would be using my paddle for is portaging. So we do a lot of these small creeks up in the mountains where we might have a log jam, 1 or 2 log jams a mile. So packing the raft, picking up the boat, and I'm using the paddle to brace myself as I'm walking through the stream and to help push my way through. And my paddle has taken a beating, but it is still, I don't have a carbon fiber. It must be the fiberglass, but yeah, I did not expect to use it as a hiking pole as much as I am.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, Werdner, the paddle you have, that is an excellent brand. Aquabound is what I started with, and that's more affordable. They make great paddles, and some are fiberglass and some are more affordable materials. So that's where most people start is with an Aquabound paddle, and they're great. They also make a high-end paddle as well, so you can find something that'll work for you.
Now, when I started, I remember seeing something where you could take a paddle blade and put it on a trekking pole. And I know there's hikers out there that are like, I can just repurpose one of my hiking poles and that's less weight to have to carry. I never tested that, but it seemed like if you can't trust that paddle, then you might as well not even go. I don't know. Do you have any experience with those, or maybe they're not even on the market anymore?
Yeah, I do have some experience with that. I took that same mentality on a trip in like maybe 2012. It was a 30-day trip, self-supported, and so we were just counting every ounce. And I figured out it was a little bit involved. What I ended up doing was the handles on ski poles are like they're put on with a heat sensitive glue, so you can reactivate it by heating the handles. So I'd boil the handles and pull them off, and I think it was dishwasher hosing that I would then put on instead of the handles, and that happened to be just the right diameter to take my paddle blades. So I had this like 2 poles with 2 paddles, and it was all strapped together, and it worked. But it wasn't, in the long run, it wasn't worth doing all that. And if we had to do any challenging paddling, it might have been in trouble, and it might have been a deal breaker. So that's kind of where I go when I think about what corners to cut with equipment, because I'd hate to be out there, you're doing this whole trip, and I'd hate to have to turn around because I saved that like 8 ounces or even that whole pound. This has changed a little bit as I've gotten older. I'm more willing to carry more stuff now, which is weird because my knees are getting weaker, right? It's like kind of reversed evolution. But I don't want to be on a mountain and have an aluminum crampon break when a steel crampon would have worked. That kind of decision. But I do love the mindset of trying to think of multiple uses for equipment. That's super fun. but it can bite you in the ass.
Yeah, it is fun, but I think similarly to you, I want to take something that I know what I can trust, and especially how are you going to be using it in moving water in class 2, 3, 4 water. And the risk factor is so much higher than backpacking. I joke with Kirk, you know, on a long distance trail, I might almost die twice. I might almost die twice in an hour, you know, have situations where I have to make decisions and keep myself safe. There's this or that feature, and it's just you really need to trust your gear. Another in that realm are helmets. So when I started, I saw a lot of people wearing bike helmets when they were paddling, and again, as Kirk was a guide and a teacher, he's like, well, think about what that helmet's doing for you when you're paddling. If you are upside down and there are rocks on the bottom of the river, will that bike helmet, which has big holes, prevent your cranium from being crushed by a rock? Maybe not, depending on the rock you encounter. So that is another area where it seems like you really don't want to cut corners. Like the reason whitewater helmets are sturdy, hard plastic and heavy are because they're going to protect your head. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got the same lecture from one of my kayaking mentors who basically said, you know, it is annoying to have yet another helmet, but he's like, if you're going to get a specialty helmet, get the one that you wear when you're upside down in water, you know, like when you can't breathe. It's the only environment where you can't breathe. So it's like, take the extra strip, wear the whitewater helmet. A lot of whitewater helmets also have a little, just a short bill out front, and some have longer bills, but the function of that bill is that it actually creates an air pocket in front of your face when the water is flowing over the top of the helmet. That's an awesome feature. That's definitely something we want in terms of safety. So with this, you're kind of going to catch this answer over and over from me. You know, the right helmet for you is what you have access to, and that might be a bike helmet, but then you probably shouldn't go down a class 3 river, class 4 river. You can match your objective to your equipment, to your skill level, and not have a scary or high risk environment outing.
Right, and a lot of these things you can work up to and swap gear out and shop sales and all of that kind of thing. So what are the other big ticket items? What would you recommend? So let's give a scenario, a class 2 river, which is no big rapids, it's moving water, it's not still. So what would you say, someone who wants to go on a class 2 river, what is the gear you would suggest they take with them?
Well, we haven't talked about life vests, and that's number 1 on the list. And what matters there is that it should probably be a Coast Guard approved type 3 vest. So all that means is that somebody's looked at it and been like, okay, this is a quality product that can keep you afloat. These vests are rated, the lowest buoyancy rating on life vests is 15.5 pounds. And I never really understood, that's just a number to me. But another of the Swiftwater safety instructors mentioned to me the other day, he was explaining that that's like our bodies, because we're mostly water, are basically neutrally buoyant, but they're neutrally buoyant in a way that leaves our nose underwater. And the average body, if you add that 15.5 pounds of flotation, it brings their nose above the water line. So that's where that number comes from. And there are higher buoyancy vests that'll actually bring your mouth above water line. So that's great. Coast Guard's figured this out. They check the boxes, and you want a well-fitting vest, and it matters that it fits well. And if you're purchasing it online, you can get some directions online about how to make sure that that's the right fit for you. And then next on the list, even if this is class 2 water, class 2 water has a lot of fatalities, and I would want to know the temperature of the water of your outing, because cold water it's a killer. And even if it's not a killer, it makes things uncomfortable. It's not as much fun to paddle when you're cold, which happens a lot in cold water. So we're talking about a dry suit or a wetsuit, but most pack rafters don't want a wetsuit because they weigh more and they're not as compact as far as getting it into the backpack. Dry suits, I think the cheapest dry suit you can find is probably around $600. And that might be a good place to start. So those two, with your helmet, with your paddle, that's your base kit. You should have good footwear that protects your feet. You should have some other things. You might want gloves if it's cold. But the life vest, the dry suit, the helmet, the paddle, that's the core.
Yeah, I learned the footwear firsthand. I love to hike in chacos, so I was like, obviously chacos are going to be a great pack rafting shoot. No, again, that was one of these portaging scenarios where I got out of my boat and immediately, like in the creek, cut my toe open on a sharp rock. And so now I always wear closed toe shoes. And yeah, the dry suit is a game changer, because even in the middle of summer, some of our rivers are cold. The Metolius River is cold, coming right up from the ground all year round. And plus, a lot of these, especially desert rivers, only run in the winter or the spring. So you want to get out there and time it so when the rain hits the snow and there's an actual nice flow of water in some of these creeks, yeah, you want to know that you're going to be toasty warm. And when it's pouring rain, it doesn't even matter. You can wear your down and your wool sweater underneath that. So yeah, game changer. I'm sure in Alaska you live in your dry suit.
It's right. It's not. I mean, I started in rain gear. Same thing, right? We're all going through this evolution, what we can afford. But in Alaska, when people are asking me about getting into pack rafting, I suggest that they incorporate the cost of the dry suit as part of their decision, their budgeting. And I guess I just give a little summary to how you want to dress and for pack rafting. And the rule of thumb is basically dress for the swim. Again, this is where we're playing this game of what could go wrong. Well, what could go wrong is if you're swimming instead of boating. And then how do you accommodate that, and staying dry makes a huge difference. So that's kind of how you would determine your layering under that dry suit. And it takes a bit of trial and error to find that sweet spot for you where you don't get too sweaty, you don't get too cold.
And now you've mentioned a swiftwater rescue class a few times. Will you explain what that is and your suggestion if everyone should take that before, during, when should they consider taking something like that?
Yeah, well, so independent of pack rafting, there is a set of instructional courses called Swiftwater Rescue Training or Swiftwater Rescue Technician Training. And some of these classes are targeted at like fire departments and rescue professionals. And it's stuff like how to pull a truck out of the river. So a lot of that's not that relevant to us. But the other parts of those classes are how to swim, how to recover an unconscious swimmer, how to stabilize somebody that's got a foot trapped in the river, like stuck between rocks. So that stuff's all super relevant to us. How to use throw ropes. And there are more and more courses now that are kind of targeted toward pack rafters that focus on those more relevant pieces of that curriculum. And absolutely, that's an awesome course for everyone. And you should probably do that every 3 years. It's, you know, I practice that stuff every year. I mean, I teach it, so it's a little bit different. But even if I wasn't teaching it, yeah, you bet, like April, May, I'd be out practicing with my throw ropes. So that's a little bit more on the rescue end of the spectrum. And there are now, at least in the hot spots that have more pack rafting, like some in Colorado, in Alaska, and I bet like Missoula, Boise, some of these cities. There are some how to pack raft, or like pack rafting 101. And that's going to be like probably a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, but in person, and going to the pond to practice that wet reentry, getting back in your boat. And yeah, absolutely, that's a great place to start. It's an opportunity to meet other pack rafters. It's an opportunity to practice your skills and identify gaps in your knowledge. And I think that really is worth practicing each year. It's kind of like, I don't know if many people that are listening are backcountry skiers, but it's the same strategy with avalanche stuff. It's like you practice with your beacon each year. You don't just count on remembering how to do everything from year to year.
Yeah, and something that I've heard, and I really think it makes a lot of sense, is say you call yourself a class 2 paddler, like I can paddle successfully through a class 2 stretch of river. But I was challenged in that maybe you're really a class 2 river when you can rescue someone from a class 2 river. It's like it goes both ways, not just keeping yourself safe, but when you're traveling, I think it's a good rule of thumb to paddle with others is, can you provide safety? Can you provide help, assistance to someone else if they get in trouble? I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked, and I'm developing my skills is looking out for the other people that you're with.
I like that. I haven't heard it said that way. Another way I've heard it is Nate Ostis, who's he wrote a textbook for NOLS, an excellent swiftwater rescue guide. And he said a class 3 boater is somebody that can swim class 3 water. So that's part of it too. It's not just a question of being able to paddle and navigate through those rapids, but to be able to swim it if things go wrong, or like you're saying, to be able to help somebody if things go wrong. I like it. I think those are all components of what it takes to say, I am a class 2 paddler, I am a class 3 paddler. Something I put some effort into in the book was a way for people to help monitor their progress, because this is something I'm asked a lot as well. It's like, am I ready to go to class 3 water? And so I've got some guidelines in the book. And one thing that I really liked was that I inherited from a friend about paddling up a level. And he describes, he was like a kayaking phenom, like a teenager, and wanted to go paddle the big rapids on the local run. And his dad said, you can do that as soon as you paddle the smaller rapids backwards, or something like this. And so he had to work at that. And when he developed the skills to paddle those smaller rapids backwards, then he went to the big rapids, paddled forwards, and was in great shape. So I love that. I love that mentality of like, let me use the skills at that higher, for water that's more difficult, let me use those at less difficult water. So I'm not at risk, but I'm building all these skills. I'm building the muscle memory. Super cool. I think that's an awesome learning strategy.
Yeah. Something I want to touch on before we go to other questions is repair. What I've really loved, so I have the same boat that I bought almost 10 years ago, and I have probably like 20 patches on it. And what I love most about these boats is that tenacious tape, sometimes duct tape, it is so easy to patch them in the field. And in fact, one trip, Kirk and I were out and he ran into a pointy rock, and huge, like 8-inch gash on his boat and he started sinking. And it's just, okay, they're pretty easy to repair. Do you have any good like repair stories or in the field, do it yourself stories like that?
Yeah, my favorite was a simple one. There's a, I was going to say new, but I guess I've been using it for several years now. There's an underwater tape, and it's like Gorilla makes one, Nashua makes one, and I thought this stuff can't possibly work underwater, and so I tried it. I was alongside a friend whose boat had a slow leak right at the water line, and I had him lean away from me and expose that tube to me, and I just cut a slice of this tape. We're both sitting in our boats floating down the river, and I just put that on his boat while we're going down the river, and it held. So
Right.
I have a big chunk of that I use now. I'm totally sold, and I've used it on a few other small holes as well. Another gear repair story, that this one isn't mine, but one of my favorites, was a friend that lost a paddle blade. It's actually shockingly common. But he had this great solution where he took a band of, I don't know if it was alder or willow, a flexible green limb of wood, and bent it in a paddle shape, and then I think he put a stuff sack over that and taped the stuff sack to kind of provide the face of the paddle, and then went 70 miles or something with that. So pretty awesome. Yeah, and I agree, the boats are shockingly repairable, which is really refreshing. It helps when you're deciding to make that big purchase, to know that they can last 10 years with home repairs.
Yeah, I found I got the most holes when I'm portaging. So I know there's questions about where do you go, how do you decide where to go, and really we tend to look at a map and say this blue line looks interesting. If there's a trail along the river so you can scout it as you're hiking in, that's great, because then you can, if there are any features, if there are logs in the water, you can check it out as you're walking in and then boat out. But it's often when I'm carrying my boat and pushing through brush, that I get little pinprick holes in the boat. And so I have a lot of those that I've had to patch over the years. But can you talk to how do you decide where to pack raft or where to go? I know there's a question about water to land ratio. Does it matter? Like, how do you suggest people, well, how do you plan a trip, and then how do you suggest other people plan a trip?
This is a tough one, because I think the conditions are so different in Alaska, where it's almost, there's either roadside runs that are really well established, or there's a legitimate remote backcountry trip where you are either hours or days, or I guess weeks from help. And there isn't much in between. And I think you all in the lower 48 have a lot more in between, where you can get in the woods but still be kind of close to an exit if you need. I lean heavily on the resources that the rest of the paddling community has already put together. Like, anytime I'm looking at a new river, I'll put on the Facebook boating group, put a question, hey, does anybody know anything about the whatever river, and collect information that way. The true remote rivers that don't have a lot of information, I'll geek out in Google Earth and kind of calculate gradient and try to identify rapids. And I've got some of those resources on my website, but I feel like that's probably less appropriate for new. It should be less appropriate for new paddlers, right? New paddlers probably want to stick to that learning curve and being a little bit closer to safety. But mostly I would lean on what everybody else has already figured out, because it's easy to think that we're inventing something new, but boy, you can learn a lot from kayakers and from canoers, and these guys these communities have really built up a lot of resources that allow us to just kind of get right to the put in without having to recreate a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something that I've heard a lot from Kirk is if you want to learn how to pack raft, learn how to kayak. If you want to know, what this river is, look up a Soggy Sneakers or American Whitewater. It's like, yeah, like you're saying, the resources are already there. There is a huge percentage of the population that's paddling. And I think a lot of what pack rafters want to do, even like sea kayakers, canoers, whitewater canoers, kayakers, the resources are there, and there are multi-day long distance canoe trips and sea kayak trips. Even in Oregon, the Willamette River is 100-mile river trail in the Willamette Valley, and you can do that in any craft. It doesn't have to be a sea kayak, it could be your pack raft. In fact, we do a lot of roadside boating. So Kirk will be in his hardshell, I'll be in my pack raft because that's my boat. And it doesn't matter that I'm not actually packing it. I'm, paddling it, and it's how I, stay comfortable in the boat. So we have a question that's come through about threshold really for solo. It seems like solo paddling. And he's equating it to like backcountry skiing, people head in with a partner, especially Abbey terrain. What is the threshold to travel with a partner? I did a very long solo pack raft trip, 175 miles on the Owyhee as part of the Oregon Desert Trail. And it was really, I spent a lot of time thinking about the safety, but I'm also a long distance solo backpacker. So there's like a whole nother skill set. I'm a wilderness first responder, all these other things. And I think a lot of it comes down to making good decisions. And so a lot of the bigger water, I chose to portage and walk around and just, can you make good decisions ahead and in reach? I was communicating sometimes several times a day with my partner, but I realized that is also risky. Can you speak a little bit to the solo aspect and how do you gauge if it's a real risk, or to me it was an acceptable risk and in line with my interests and my skills?
Yeah, so to the extent possible, I'm making all my decisions based on data. And that's just how my brain works. That's what I want to do, is analyze what we know and then make my decision based on that. And if you are looking at the data, the fatality data, the answer is don't paddle solo. Don't ever paddle solo. Don't do it. So that's the right thing to do. This is a new way that I've been thinking about risk for myself, for my personal trips. It's helpful for me just to say the right thing to do. In this case, the right thing to do is always paddle with a partner. And that helps me acknowledge when I'm cutting corners. And in your case, you're saying, I'm going to do this trip solo. I know it's not the right thing to do, but I will check in at this crossing. I will be really willing to portage, everything that I'm even hesitant about. So those are all ways that you've moved away from, or that you're sort of trying to balance out the fact that you're not taking the right path here. And this is a big one. If you have somebody with you, ideally somebody that's this competent, capable partner, that is a huge resource for you. That's your safety net. They can help you get to your boat, or you can hold on to their boat and get pulled to shore. Yeah, so I don't know how much we want to, we're kind of running out of time. I could talk about the 12 fatalities. I think I think 4 of the 12 were solo paddlers. And I think if those guys had been with partners, maybe none of them, right? Like that's just such a big margin to have somebody there looking out for you. Not everybody has access to a partner. I get that. I've paddled solo a little bit, but it sure isn't first choice. And when I do, like you're saying, I drop that risk tolerance big time. I make sure my equipment is dialed in, that I'm wearing a dry suit, that I'm wearing a vest. I commit to portage, the class 3 rapids, whatever. So recognize when you're putting yourself at greater risk and make decisions that will drop that risk tolerance. That's the advice I would give.
Yeah. So I want to take a step back towards the gear, because we didn't really talk about packing the pack raft. So, and the getting, the carrying all the gear. So the PFD, the paddle, the boat, the throw bag, the helmet, the patch kit, it adds up. I was shocked at how much my pack weighs when you're actually trying to get all of this stuff in. And that's where I think the lightweight backpackers out there among the group, it's great because you've gotten your tent down, your tarp, your sleeping bag, like the essentials down, so you can fill up all that other space with all of the boating gear. And I did just we got to help consult on a pack redesign, the Six Moon Designs Flex Pack, which now has a pocket for the paddles and more versatility to how you can strap things to it and expand and condense on size. And having a comfortable pack is a game changer. I think when I went into the Oahu as a 2-week trip, it was probably 70-pound pack. I had a week of food on my back and everything. It was painful, very painful. Do you have any packing suggestions for getting that boat in these places?
Gosh, I think you hit on them. That the ultralight strategy does serve us really well by allowing us to cut out a bunch of the other stuff, or at least get it as light as possible. I like that too as part of my outdoor experience. Like I like having less stuff. I like the simplicity of sort of, these are all the things I need for this overnighter or for this week-long trip. And again, like the biggest ways to save weight, you mentioned them, like the big 3, the pack, the sleeping system, the shelter. And then it's depending on what size, what volume backpack you have, the vest might be on the outside, the vest and the boat might be on the outside. Like, you can make that work. But yeah, it can add weight.
Yeah, and what I really like about the boats, so when we first bought our alpacas, they did not have the cargo fly, and so we got them retrofitted. So this is a dry suit, a dry zipper on the boat, so you can store gear inside the boat. This seems like a game changer. So when we're out doing week-long trips, we store the gear inside the boat, and it actually makes the boat paddle with more stability through the rapids, and you have a little more push. I found that to be the biggest thing. So you can throw extra odds and ends in the boat, anything you don't need during the day. I think, and I see a lot of the versions now do have a zipper on them, but that in my mind is huge.
Yeah, I agree. I can't imagine going back. I sure love having that zipper, and it makes me way more comfortable. If I am in rapids, it makes me way more comfortable going through rapids than having a big backpack on the front.
Yeah.
But like you, that's not how I started. Like people can do it. It's just don't do it and plan to go on class 3 water. Like just adjust your objectives to match what you've got, what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, I know we're getting down on time, but here's another question, a good question. With climate change, the places that are ideal for pack rafts seem to be changing. So some places are drying up, others are expanding with hydrology, wildfires, indigenous rights, access rights. So where do you see pack rafting going in the future? Do you think there'll be more concentration on certain rivers, or people spreading out, or?
Boy, that is an awesome question, and I'm not qualified to answer it because I am so focused on Alaska, and Alaska has way more rivers than I'll ever have a chance to get on, that I'd like to. I like that mindset. I would enjoy thinking about that, thinking globally, nationally, what's changing with rivers, but I have no idea what's going on anywhere besides my backyard.
Well, something that I've done more, because it's what we have more of the year, are these really low volume rivers, and a lot of the year, so the rivers have almost no water, but there's a lot you can scoot along, you can pick up your boat and walk through. We have done some really low volume paddling in beautiful, amazing places. Some people might have said there's not enough to go, but
Yeah.
if you're willing, I think what pack crafting offers is a sense of adventure. Like I started, it's curiosity. And because you can carry it, you can carry your boat, you can pack it in, you can walk until you find something suitable, you can walk to a high alpine lake. I think it really opens the door to exploration within your comfort level, within your skill set. But yeah, I think it's really exciting to go try something. And we often go to rivers and we're like, we have no idea, let's just go find out. And that's half of the fun. And we may never paddle. There have been plenty of trips where we put everything in the backpack and we don't end up inflating the boats, but that's kind of the trips we like to do. So what would you say a favorite trip you would recommend in Alaska? Is there something high on your list that we can all show up?
I don't have a favorite. I love the scenery of the Brooks Range, and my wife and I have been doing long trips up there, like 3-week trips up there the last 5 years. And I get something really rewarding from that experience. But I also love driving an hour from Anchorage to run 6 Mile Canyon, which is world class, class 4 rapids, and just the thrill of like having to be on my line and knowing which stroke to make right when, and having it matter. I love that. It's super rewarding too. And I like the stuff in the middle that's like remote and kind of technical, but not class 4. So I'm loving it all. Water, it's these boats just helped me realize like how much water was out there and how it could be access instead of an obstacle. Like growing up, I always thought the river was like the end of where you could go. You can't go any further. You can't cross that river. But with the pack raft, that's like a new trail for me. I love that. Yeah. So that's a little bit of a cop out, but that's true.
Yeah. Well, I like to say rivers are trails too.
Exactly.
But also, this is something I think you've been doing a lot of, and other people are curious about the multi-sport aspect of it. So it's not just hiking and paddling. Throw some skis on there, throw a bike on there. Can you talk a little bit about the ways you or other people are throwing other sports with the Packraft in there?
Yeah, the strategy for me on longer trips is that I want to travel as efficiently as possible. And so I kind of identify like which part could be skied, which part could be biked. And then I try to plan the trip to make that work out. And all that I would want to emphasize to listeners here is that as soon as you do that, you've got to step back to your foundations. You got to go to the pond with a bike on the front and fall out of your boat, because you might not be able to get back in the boat, and you need to know that before you go out there for real, and you need to have a plan for how to get to shore, how to take care of yourself. So same thing with skis on the sides, even having a backpack on the bow if you don't have the cargo zipper that you're talking about. If you've got a backpack strapped to your bow, the right thing to do is to practice all that in a controlled setting before you go on the trail or go for the overnight.
So practice before you go on that 3-week adventure.
Are you getting tired of hearing me say that?
So is there anything we haven't talked about you think a beginner would be well suited to hear about before they run out there?
There's so much, right? That's why I just spent 1.5 years writing a book.
Buy the book.
Buy the book. That's what they need to know. No, I think I loved how you framed this with curiosity right from the get-go. I think that's it, curiosity and care. And that's how the book starts, is like the path to safety is caring. And this got real personal to me when my friend Rob died, because like that just sucked for everybody, right? His parents, his partner, and all of his friends. And this isn't the right way to say it, but like, could he have cared more? Could he have cared enough to have taken a swiftwater rescue class? Could we as a community, his friends, have cared more and recognized that we all needed to be wearing dry suits? He wasn't wearing a dry suit. I wasn't wearing a dry suit. So that was probably part of his fatality. But it's recognizing that like caring is going to be the key to a long paddling career. That's what I want. That's what I want everybody here to have too. Caring, curiosity, getting on the learning curve, sharing when you make mistakes, helping others when you see stuff they're doing wrong. That's all part of this culture of safety.
Great, thank you.
Well, I think that's an excellent segue. Thank you so much, Luke and Renee, for being part of this conversation. I know a lot of people had so many questions about pack rafting, and I feel like you both did such a wonderful job about showing the importance of curiosity and also practice. So once again, Luke Mehl has a new book, the Pack Rafters Handbook, and there are pre-orders that are going on right now. We will follow up with, I know that some of you, thank you everyone for managing our technical difficulties. We will post on YouTube the full length of this video, and Facebook if we can as well. So if you missed any portion of it, you'll be able to catch up. We'll also be posting a transcript of this in the next few weeks once we've completed that, and you can read the whole transcript of the conversation on our website, Trailline Review. Yes, and once again, we will send a link with Luke's new book, and I hope you all have a chance to check it out. Thanks again to all of you for joining us.